My name is Nora Mercer. I am 31 years old. And the night my brother stood up at our mother's dinner table and bet our parents that I would fail the bar exam, I learned that loud certainty is usually fear that has not been named yet. It was a Sunday in late July. The kitchen smelled of pot roast and warm bread, and a box fan pushed the heat around the room without cooling anything. My father's chair at the head of the table had been empty for 2 years, and Grant had taken to sitting in it like the seat had always been his. My father's old folding ruler still lay on the sideboard where he had left it, brass corners worn soft from 40 years of his thumb. Grant raised his glass and grinned at our mother. 50 says she chokes, he said. 100 says she doesn't even tell us the score. Everyone laughed. My mother laughed. He looked right at me while he said it, the way a man looks at a column of numbers he has already added up. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I picked up my father's ruler, folded it closed, and put it in my purse. 11 weeks later, I stood in my father's office and read 3 sentences out loud. By the time I finished, my brother had no company, no deal, and no version of the story left to sell. But to understand how a bet about an exam took all of it from him, the story has to start at that table. Before I tell you what those 3 sentences said, and what happened in that room when I finished reading, I would like to know what part of the world you are listening from tonight. And tell me one thing while the kettle is still warm. Has anyone in your own family ever been quietly certain that you would fail? Hold that thought. My father built Mercer lumber and supply with his own hands, starting from a single rented shed off Route 9 in Marlow, Ohio. Over 35 years, it grew into the place every contractor in 3 counties trusted. 2 yards, a millwork shop, a fleet of delivery trucks, and a name that meant something. When a builder said the lumber came from Mercer's, the customer relaxed. My father earned that. He earned it one straight board at a time. He died of a heart attack on a Tuesday in March, 2 years before that dinner. He was 63. He went out to open the yard at 5 in the morning, the way he had for decades, and one of the drivers found him sitting in his truck with the keys still in his hand. I think about that more than I should. He died on his way to work, holding the keys to something he loved. Growing up, there were 2 kinds of Mercer children. There was Grant, who was loud and easy and good with people, who could sell a man a porch he did not need and make him grateful for it. And there was me, who was quiet, who read too much, who asked questions at the dinner table that made the room go still. My brother got trophies. I got told to lower my voice. He was the future of the family. I was the one who would, in my mother's words, figure herself out eventually. So I figured myself out. I worked the front desk at a law office during the day and took classes at night for 6 years, while Grant ran the yard and called me the college girl like it was a punchline. Nobody in my family thought a lawyer was a real job. My father once told me that lawyers were only men who got paid to argue, and I let him believe that because it was easier than telling him the truth. The truth was that I wanted to protect things. I had spent my whole childhood watching people get talked out of what was theirs, and I wanted to be the one who read the fine print before the handshake. What none of them knew was that my father had read more fine print than any of us. About a year before he died, he had quietly sat down with a lawyer named Howard Prout and built something careful around the company. He put the controlling share of Mercer Lumber into a trust. He did it on purpose, and he did it in a way that could never be undone, not even by him. My father had a phrase for that kind of decision. You pour a footing once, he used to say. After it sets, you build on it or you build nothing. He believed that about money, about marriages, about the company. A footing was a promise to the future, and he never made one he could not keep. I did not learn the shape of what he had built until after the funeral, when Howard asked me to come to his office alone. He slid a folder across the desk and let me read it in silence. The trust held 75% of the company. My father had named a successor to take over running it after he was gone. He had not named Grant. He had named me. There was one condition written into the page, in plain language. I would take control as trustee on the day I was admitted to the bar. Until then, Howard would hold a caretaker role with narrow powers, and Grant would stay on as general manager, drawing a salary, running the day-to-day, but owning none of it. I asked Howard why. He took off his glasses and told me what my father had said when he signed it. My father had said, Run a lumberyard for 35 years and you learn the difference between a man who builds and a man who borrows. Grant borrows, Nora measures. I sat with that for a long time. My father, who had never once told me he was proud of me, had bet his whole life's work on me without saying a single word. There was a reason he worried. Years earlier, Grant had taken money from the company accounts to cover a debt and a truck he could not afford. My father caught it, covered it once, and never spoke of it in public again. But he had not forgot. He had simply done what he always did when something mattered. He poured a footing. I think of a Saturday the summer I turned 16, when he put that folding ruler in my hand in the millwork shop and made me square a shelf bracket 3 times until the line was true. I was bored and hot and certain it was close enough. He tapped the wood with one finger. "A crooked cut hides for a while," he said. "Then the whole shelf leans and everybody can see it." I rolled my eyes at the time. I did not understand that he was not really talking about the shelf. He was talking about what happens to anything built on a line that was never straight to begin with. I kept the trust documents in a green metal lockbox my father had used for 40 years, the kind with a small brass key and a dent in one corner. I kept his folding ruler in there too, after that dinner. I did not know yet that both of those things would end up on a table in front of my brother. I only knew that I had 11 weeks until the bar results came out, and that my family had no idea what those results would mean. The person who ran the office at Mercer's was Marie Sandoval. She had kept my father's books for 22 years, and she had a memory like a ledger. After he died, she stayed on under Grant, and she sent me a birthday card every year with a single line inside: "Your dad would be proud." I did not think much about Marie that summer. I should have. She was already noticing things that did not add up. Because here is what I have come to understand about quiet companies built by careful men. They run on trust, and trust is the easiest thing in the world to spend when the careful man is gone. My father had poured a footing to protect the building. What he could not pour was a footing around his own son. By the time I sat down for that pot roast in late July, my brother had already spent 8 months turning our father's life work into the cover for a problem none of us could see. And the bet he made at the table that night was not really about me at all. It was about buying himself a little more time. The problem had a name. It was called Cardinal Landing. 2 years earlier, right around the time our father died, Grant had put money into a riverfront development on the edge of town. Condos, a marina, a row of shops, the kind of project that looks like a fortune on a glossy page. My brother had always wanted something that was his, something that did not have our father's name on it. He wanted to be a developer, not the kid who took over Dad's lumberyard. I understand that more than I let myself admit. He spent his whole life being measured against a man who never lost a dollar, and he wanted, just once, to be the one who built something bigger. Cardinal Landing collapsed. The financing fell through, a partner walked, and the river flooded the site 2 springs in a row. By that summer, Grant personally owed a private lender called Keystone Bridge Capital a balloon payment he could not make. He had signed for it himself. If he missed it, he would lose his house and everything in it. So my brother did 3 things, and it matters that all 3 are clear, because in the room that summer, no one understood any of them. First, he started bleeding the company. He raised his own management fee twice without telling anyone, and he began moving money out of Mercer's in small, careful amounts, the kind that do not trip an alarm until they add up. By July, Marie's quiet records showed nearly $400,000 gone in consulting and equipment that no one could find. Second, he borrowed against the yard. The flagship lumberyard on Route 9, the original property, the heart of everything my father built, Grant pledged it as collateral on a bridge loan to cover his own debt. He had no authority to do that. He signed papers claiming he controlled the company, and he gambled that no one would ever check. Third, and worst, he decided to sell. A regional chain called Drummond Supply Group had been circling small family yards for years, buying them up and stripping the names off the buildings. Grant opened a quiet conversation with a Drummond man named Alan Voss. The plan was simple. Sell Mercer lumber to Drummond, use the money to clear Keystone, and walk away. And tucked inside the deal was a private side agreement, a consulting and non-compete payment to Grant personally, which is a polite way of describing a kickback. But every one of those moves had the same flaw. To sell the company, to borrow against it, to do any of it cleanly, Grant needed to be the trustee. And he was not. My father had made sure of that. The control sat in a trust, waiting for one single event, my admission to the bar. That is why the bet mattered. That is why my brother could not afford for me to pass. If I failed, the family would keep believing the company belonged to Grant, the way they always had, and he could push the sale through before anyone asked a hard question. If I passed, the keys to everything would land in the hands of the one person who reads the fine print before the handshake. So Grant did the thing he had always been good at. He worked the room. He went to our mother privately, weeks before that dinner, and told her the company was in trouble, that he needed to act fast, that Nora was never going to pass anyway, and even if she did, she would not know the first thing about running a yard. He asked our mother to sign a paper naming him the trustee and erasing the condition our father had written. He told her it was just cleanup. He told her it was what Dad would have wanted. And my mother, who had spent her whole life keeping the peace by giving Grant whatever he asked for, picked up the pen. The bet at the dinner table was the public version of all of it. It was Grant planting the story in front of witnesses. She is going to fail. She is not serious. I am the one who carries this family. He needed everyone nodding along so that when the sale closed, it would look like the natural order of things. He had a deadline he never said out loud. The Keystone balloon was due in November. The bar results were coming in October. My brother was racing a calendar, and he thought he was the only one who knew the date. The results were posted on a Friday in late October at 10 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, refreshing a web page I could barely look at. When the list loaded, I scrolled to the M's. Mercer, Nora, passed. I did not scream. I did not call my mother. I sat very still and let the truth settle into the room like light. Then I did the only thing that mattered. I drove to Howard Pruitt's office and I signed the paper that accepted my role as trustee of my father's trust. The moment the ink dried, I was no longer the college girl. I controlled 75% of Mercer Lumber and Supply, and I had the legal duty to protect it. Howard looked at me across the same desk where he had shown me the folder 2 years earlier. "Do you understand what you can do now?" he asked. I told him I was beginning to. "Then I need to tell you what your brother has been doing," he said, "because Marie Sandoval called me 3 days ago." Marie came to Howard's office that afternoon with a banker's box. Inside were the things she had been quietly copying for months. The inflated fee approvals, the wire transfers to accounts she did not recognize. A loan summary from Keystone Bridge Capital with the lumberyard listed as collateral and Grant's signature at the bottom, claiming an authority he did not have. And a draft agreement with Drummond's Supply Group, including the private payment to Grant, printed and initialed. Marie set it all on the table and folded her hands. "I kept thinking I was wrong," she said. "I wanted to be wrong. But Ray trusted me with these books, and I will not sit here and watch his son sell the place out from under him while I pretend I did not see." Her voice did not shake. Mine almost did. I needed more than documents. I needed speed, so I called the one person who had ever told me I was good at this. Her name was Diane Aucaffer. She had supervised the legal clinic where I spent 2 years of nights, and she was the kind of litigator who walked into a courtroom the way a surgeon walks into an operating room. When I was a student, she once told me I had the steadiest hands she had seen in a decade. I had carried that one sentence for years, on the days my own family made me feel like a hobbyist. Now I called her and asked for help, and she said yes before I finished the question. Diane read Marie's box in an hour. Then she looked at me and said the thing I had been afraid to say out loud. "Your brother has been treating an irrevocable trust like it is his to spend. It is not, and you are about to remind him." We worked until 2 that morning at her kitchen table, the petition spread between us in a fan of paper and cold tea. She handed me the pages to read aloud as we built them, the same way she used to make me argue both sides in the clinic, and somewhere past midnight she stopped me. "You see how steady you are right now," she said. "You have been this your whole life. Your family just never needed you to be, so they decided you were not." I did not answer. I was afraid my voice would give me away. Before I left, she put her hand flat on the stack of pages. "Your father chose right," she said. I drove home in the dark with those 3 words doing what no trophy in my brother's case had ever done for him. We built the case fast. The plan was clean and lawful, and that mattered to me more than speed. As the new trustee, I would file an emergency petition asking the court to confirm my control, to declare any change to the trust invalid, and to freeze the sale of the company before it could close. Marie's records would prove the rest. I would not raise my voice once. I would let the paper do the talking, the way my father always had. That was the plan on Monday. On Tuesday, the floor dropped out. I learned from a contractor who still bought his nails from Mercer's that Grant had moved the Drummond closing up. It was no longer weeks away. It was that Friday. Grant had told Voss that he had full authority, that the family was aligned, and that the paperwork was handled. Worse, my mother had already signed the amendment naming him trustee months ago, and Grant was waving it around as proof. Drummond had wired a deposit that very morning to show good faith. For one long night, I sat with the fear that I was too late. If the sale closed on Friday, the money would move, the lumberyard would be tangled up with Keystone, and untangling it could take years in court, years the company might not survive. My brother had not just been racing a calendar. He had moved the finish line. But what I did not understand yet was that the amendment my mother signed carried a flaw Grant had never thought to check. And at first, neither had I. I called Diane at 11 at night. I asked her if the signed amendment beat me. There was a pause on the line, and then she laughed once, softly, the way a lawyer laughs when the other side has just handed over the case. "Nora," she said, "the trust is irrevocable. Your father built it so it could never be changed after he was gone. Your mother could sign that paper 1,000 times. It is worth exactly nothing. Grant has been selling a company he was never allowed to sell, using a power he never had." I sat down on my kitchen floor. My father, 2 years in the ground, had poured a footing strong enough to hold. Grant had built his whole rescue on a paper that would not bear weight. We filed the petition Wednesday morning. Then the phone started. Grant was notified of the filing within hours, and he called me 11 times before I answered once. When I finally picked up, his voice was not the easy salesman's voice from the dinner table. It was tight and high. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he said. "You're going to bankrupt this whole family. You're going to be the one who killed Dad's company. Is that what you want, to win so bad you burn it all down?" I told him the company was not for sale. He told me I was insane. He told me I had always been jealous, always been bitter, always been waiting for a chance to feel important. 3 accusations, none of them true, all of them easier for him than the truth. My mother called next. She was crying before I said hello. "Nora, please," she said. "He's your brother. You don't take your own brother to court. Your father would be heartbroken. Can't we just sit down as a family and work this out?" I asked her one question. "Mom, did you sign a paper making Grant the trustee?" She went quiet. Then she said, "He told me it was just cleanup. He told me you would never pass." "I passed," I said, and then, more gently than I felt, "He didn't ask you to sign cleanup, Mom. He asked you to sign me out of the will Dad wrote." She did not have an answer for that. None of them did. The relatives came after that, the way they always do. An uncle left a voicemail about how family does not air its business in public. A cousin texted that I was being dramatic. That money is not worth a family. I did not reply. I had learned somewhere in those 6 years of night classes that the ones who plead for silence are usually the ones who profit most from it. The hardest moment came Thursday night. Grant came to my door. He had not slept. His shirt was wrong, his hands would not stay still, and for the first time since we were children, he looked at me without a single defense up. "I'm drowning, Nora," he said quietly. "Cardinal Landing took everything. I owe people who don't forgive. And I keep thinking about Dad, how he never once thought I had the brains to run anything, how he gave it to you instead of me. Do you know what that does to a person? To be the one everybody points to, and to be failing the whole time, and to watch the afterthought get handed the keys." For a moment, I almost broke, because some of it was real. My brother had spent his whole life being measured against a man who never missed, and he had cracked under the weight of it. I understood the wound. I have the same one. There were years I would have given anything for our father to look at me the way he looked at Grant's trophies. But understanding a wound is not the same as letting it cut someone else. "I'm sorry you're drowning," I told him. "I am, but you didn't reach for help, Grant. You reached for the company, you pledged the yard, you found a buyer, you wrote yourself a kickback. And then you stood up at Mom's table and bet our parents I'd fail so no one would look too closely while you sold the only thing Dad ever built. He said my name like a plea. I said the only thing left to say. You bet I would fail, I told him. I am just making sure the bet settles honestly, in the open, in the same room where you told the lie. Then I closed the door, and I did not open it again that night, no matter how long he stood on the step. By Thursday evening, the court had signed its order. Friday morning was the closing, and Grant had set it at our father's office at the yard, the same wood-paneled room where Dad used to do payroll by hand. I think Grant chose it on purpose. I think he wanted to sign the company away in the one room that still smelled like our father. I got there early. The October air was sharp, and the yard smelled the way it always had at dawn, cut pine and cold metal and a little wood smoke from the burn barrel. I carried my father's green lockbox under one arm. Inside it were three things: the original trust, my new bar card, and the court's order. When I walked in, the room went quiet. My mother sat against the wall, small and gray. Alan Voss from Drummond sat at the table with a leather folder and a checkbook. Two of his people flanked him. And Grant stood at the head of the table, in our father's chair, holding a pen, wearing the same confident smile he had worn the night of the bet. Nora, he said, almost warm, performing for the room. I'm glad you came. You should see this. It's a good deal. It saves everybody. He turned to Voss. My sister's been emotional, family stuff, but Mom signed control over to me months ago, so we're all set here. He slid the amendment across the table toward Voss like a winning hand. I did not raise my voice. I set the lockbox on the table, turned the small brass key, and opened it. I took out my father's folding ruler and laid it down first, brass corners worn soft, the way it had sat on the sideboard my whole life. Then I took out 3 sheets of paper. Before anyone signs anything, I said, I am going to read something out loud. Grant laughed. Nora, sit down. I started to read. I read the court's order in plain words, the way my father read a tape measure. The court finds that the trust created by Raymond Mercer is irrevocable and cannot be amended after his death. The court finds that Nora Mercer is the sole lawful trustee of that trust. The court declares the amendment naming Grant Mercer as trustee void and prohibits any sale, transfer, or borrowing against Mercer Lumber and Supply, effective immediately. 3 sentences. I read them slowly, and I watched the color leave my brother's face the way water leaves a sink. Alan Voss set down his pen. You told me you had authority, he said to Grant. He was not asking. He picked up his folder, told his people they were done, and said the deposit would be reversed by the end of the day. Then he looked at me, gave a short nod, and walked out. The deal was gone before the coffee was cold. I expected to feel something sharp in that moment, some hot rush of winning. I did not. What I felt was quieter than that and older. It was the feeling of a board finally pulled square after years of leaning, the small click of a thing sitting the way it was always meant to sit. My hands were perfectly still on the lid of the lockbox. For the first time in that office since my father died, nothing in the room was crooked. Grant was still standing. That paper means nothing, he said, but his voice had no floor under it. Mom signed. Mom couldn't sign it away, I said. Dad made sure. He poured a footing, Grant. You built your whole rescue on a piece of paper that was never going to hold. Then I laid the rest on the table, 1 page at a time, the way Marie had taught me without ever meaning to. The Keystone loan with the yard pledged as collateral and his signature claiming an authority he never had. The $400,000 in fees and transfers no one could find. The Drummond side agreement with his private payment printed in black and white. I did not say a word as I set each one down. I had learned, somewhere in those 6 years of night classes, that the truth lands hardest when no one rushes to cover the silence after it. You waited all summer for one verdict, I said. The one about whether I passed. I just read you a different one. Grant sat down, not in our father's chair. In the chair beside it, like a man who finally understood the seat had never been his. My mother was crying, but quietly now, the kind of crying that comes when a story a person has told herself for years finally falls apart in the open. He did not yell. He did not threaten. He looked at the ruler on the table, then at me, and he said the only honest thing he had said in months. He really didn't trust me, did he? He trusted you to be exactly who you are, I said. That is why he protected what he built. I closed the lockbox. The room was very still. Outside, a delivery truck started up in the yard, and somewhere a saw began to run, and the company my father built kept breathing, because for once, the truth had gotten into the room before the signature did. My brother lost everything that morning, but not in the way he feared. He did not lose his freedom, though the court referred the matter for a full accounting, and the lawyers are still sorting through what he owes the trust. He did not lose his house, at least not to me. He lost the things he had taken without asking. He lost control of a company that was never his. He lost the Drummond deal and the kickback that came with it. And when the sale collapsed, Keystone Bridge Capital came for the debt he had signed himself, the one tied to Cardinal Landing, and there was no company left to hide behind. The footing my father poured held. The one Grant stood on did not. I did not destroy my brother. I want to be clear about that because the easy version of this story is the cruel one, and I refuse to live in it. I did not call the relatives to gloat. I did not post the documents anywhere. Revenge would have been wanting him to suffer. I only wanted the truth read out loud in the same room where the lie was told. That is not revenge. That is just letting the record speak. I kept Marie on and gave her the raise my father never did. I kept every worker in both yards. I offered Grant a path, a real one, a way to repay the trust over time and keep his dignity, on the single condition that he never again sign a Mercer name to anything. He has not taken it yet. I think he is still learning the difference between a man who builds and a man who borrows. I hope he learns it. He is still my brother. That winter, I moved my father's folding ruler from the lockbox to the desk in his office, where it sits now, brass corners worn soft, waiting for my thumb the way it once waited for his. Some mornings I open the yard at 5, the way he did, and I stand in the cold and the wood smoke and the smell of cut pine, and I understand him better than I ever did when he was alive. My brother bet our parents that I would fail. He spent the whole summer waiting for the verdict on a piece of paper. He never understood that the most important verdict was never about whether I passed. It was about who I would become when the people who were supposed to love me decided I was a safe bet to lose. A guess can sound exactly like confidence, but the truth does not guess. It just waits, quiet and patient, for someone brave enough to read it out loud. So let me ask you this. If your own family had bet against you, would you let it make you bitter, or would you let it make you certain? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.